in pursuit of the ultimate frontier.
Even children in some primitive tribes can walk unharmed on burning coals. And Albert Einstein can stretch his perceptions around the universe and point the way for others to do the same. All of us have the potential mental powers to accomplish everything that every so-called exceptional person has done.
Welcome to the program, In Pursuit of the Ultimate Frontier, where we explore the infinite possibilities of man's mind to encompass our great universe. Join us in a fascinating adventure as we examine man's heritage and discover the beginnings of a new and dynamic future.
I'm Charley Jones. I'm your host for this first in a series of discussions. Our guest is Richard Kenninger, author of The Ultimate Frontier. The philosophy presented in his book is based on concepts discovered by a worldwide brotherhood of scientists and philosophers, and we will use the information in this book as the basis of our discussions on these programs. Good day, Mr. Kenninger.
Yes, how do you do?
Very good to have you here, sir.
I'm glad to be here.
I've looked forward with some anticipation to the beginning of these discussions. And I guess, really, I should ask you about the title of your book. First of all, what do you consider an ultimate frontier?
Well, I regard a frontier as being the edge of what is unknown or is undeveloped in an individual's experience. And one's frontier can be a place or a skill or an idea. Frontiers are inherently exciting and full of promise, as well as being a little scary, and so they tend to excite the explorer and present challenges against which a person can pit himself. I think having frontiers in your life is what draws you into growth experiences.
Well, Richard, specifically, one of the things we're going to talk about today was the relationship between mind and brain. I believe it was Raymond Moody's book, Life After Life, about any one of a number of different people who had been interviewed about near-death experiences, possibly involving the clinical death of the body. And the thing that fascinated me was that regardless of the background of the person, whether Hindu or Northern European or South American Indian or whatever, the experiences that they discussed outside their physical vehicle were remarkably the same in almost every situation.
That kind of information doesn't fly with scientists.
Mm-hmm.
For years, many clairvoyants throughout the world in many different cultures who report with remarkable congruity the same kinds of observations of people who have gone through transition and who now exist essentially as spirits.
Nowadays you see quite a lot in the newspapers or in the magazines concerning the people who attempt to contact discarnate egos. And I guess that's a good term to use here, ego in that sense.
Yeah, ego meaning self.
Edgar Cayce's a good example. The information that he had medically was of one sort, but the information that he had historically seems to be far less definite.
Generally speaking, the kind of spirit who passes along information relative to, say, past life experiences, about the future, about the ancient past, very frequently make up information which has nothing to do with fact. It seems that the type of human entities who, while spirit, try to deal through mediums and other things of that sort, really have it in mind to mislead those of us who are incarnate. What the purpose of that is yet another story.
How is it that it's so apparently common in other societies and it's almost unknown in our Western culture, at least presently?
Well, it's not in our scientific philosophy by any means, and we are more scientifically oriented, I think, than anything else.
Yeah.
And it certainly is not acceptable in the Jewish or Christian theology, and it's to be forbidden.
So if information can be transmitted to the brain by the mind without regard to the physical senses, let's get into a concrete area then. Are you familiar with Uri Geller, let's say?
Yes.
Okay. He does a fair amount of work on television, and he exhorts the people in the audience or people at home watching to try it themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any follow-up on that ever?
Oh, yeah. There's been quite a bit of information relative to that. In England, for instance, he made that same invitation that people out in the audience had tried doing the same thing he did. I guess he was bending silverware mentally. No, not with his hands, but mentally. He said, well, if there's anybody out there who is successful, please write to the station and let us know, see how you're doing. I guess some 11,000 correspondents.
11,000?
Yeah, sent in, and all of them were children who were successful. Now, the adults was not within their framework.
The belief structure.
Belief structure, right, and so therefore they didn't have the ability to do it. But children saw Uri Geller do it, were invited by Uri Geller to do it themselves, and did it. Even more amazing was there was two youngsters. I think one was from Japan, another one from someplace in Europe, if I recall correctly. And a matter of fact, scientists, under very controlled laboratory conditions, observed these two youngsters bend thin metal rods that were sealed inside of glass containers, and they tied those rods into a knot.
Without touching?
Mentally, without touching them.
That's telekinetic.
Right.
So we're dealing with an area now. The information is hard to accept. It's simply outside the conscious experience of most people. And
yeah, most of us, fortunately, don't ever have those kinds of things happen to us. I mean, having died clinically and then being aware of, an interview by some higher intelligence on the other side, as it were, seeing a light and some greater being questioning you about your lifetime, and then assuring you that you can go back if you wish. Unfortunately, there's no real words for these things. You just have to draw pictures for concepts, because there's nothing in our language that tells us exactly this is the phenomenon we're talking about, because it's not a fully accepted kind of thing yet. But I believe it's occurring. The regular scientists are beginning to recognize that there's other ways of looking at things besides just what can be measured with machines. Indeed, it was quite a revelation when many nuclear scientists discovered that the result that they wanted to see, which would prove or disprove an experiment, they could actually control what these extremely sensitive meters were registering.
Are you speaking now of some of the subquantal particle behavior experiments?
Right. They found out later on that the experimental results were really thrown up for grabs, because they discovered that when the equipment wasn't working, but they thought it was working, they could still make the meters mentally. They could make the meters do what they wanted them to do, and that was not their intention.
Well, things like extrasensory perception, telepathy, clairvoyance, weren't there some experiments done that showed that the brain, well, not just the brain, I guess I'll say the mind here, the mind was operating on some level that seemed to exceed the light barrier. There were
the light, speed of light.
Things could be known instantaneously, whereas any other kind of information, electromagnetic waves, voice communication, whatever, would have to buck the inherent speed of light barrier. Certain mental telepathy projects have shown that that barrier does not exist for telepathic contact, at least as far as a transmission of knowledge or an event.
We do seem to have enough experimental evidence now that regardless of the distance, the telepathic signal is not diminished. What I recall here now is there were several Russian professors who over the last several decades demonstrated that they each could telepathically will an individual to fall asleep, or in other words, knock them out without the subject's knowledge or cooperation. For instance, there was a Dr. Platonov, another one Kotkov and Tomaszewski. They all had the ability to telepathically hypnotize or control a person, even at great distances. And it was another Russian experimental, by the way, Dr. Vasilyev, who discovered that putting a subject to be telepathically influenced into a Faraday cage, which is designed to eliminate any electromagnetic waves, like radio or anything that would be on a physical level, the being in this Faraday cage did not stop the mental signals that caused the person to fall asleep by the person who was trying to hypnotize them. And distance didn't diminish the telepathic effect. If they were in the next room or if they were in a city 200 miles away, it still worked.
I myself have, not been party to, but I have seen the results of an experiment where one set of test subjects were put in a room that was removed from the other set of test subjects. And test subject group A were wired to polygraphs. And they were told it was an extrasensory perception type experiment, and that the people in group B were going to be shocked electrically, individually, and a pretty good shock too, not enough to damage them, but
painful at any
yes, and they were being asked to determine if they could when their corresponding person in the other room was receiving the shock. And although the
this sounds like Dr. Charles Tart's experiment.
That's exactly what it was. At was it USC? Is that right?
No, it was University of California, but which is it, Irvine?
I am unfamiliar.
Davis, I believe. Yeah.
There was a spike on the polygraph each time a person in the other room, in the shock room, got a shock. And even though the person wired to the polygraph was most of the time unaware of it, the results were no more than probability would have allowed, unfortunately. but the spike was there. And I think about Star Wars at this point, and Obi-Wan talking about the Force.
It just goes to show that we're telepathically sensitive, but not necessarily consciously aware of it. Just by making a suggestion to the individual, there was somebody who was being tested who was on the campus, didn't know who they were or never met the person or anything else like that. They were able to specifically pick out that one individual subconsciously. Now, through hypnotism, you can suggest to an individual they'd be particularly keenly alert to one particular item of input.
Mm-hmm.
And this apparently was working on the suggestibility of the mind. But it wasn't hypnotism. He was just telling them that there's a person who's receiving these shocks and you be sensitive to them. There were some experiments done, for instance, where a mother rabbit had its babies put aboard a submarine, which then later sailed beneath the Arctic ice cap. And then at irregular intervals, the times of which were recorded, each one of her babies was killed. The mother rabbit was thousands of miles away where she was wired up to an electroencephalograph. And something in her responded to the very moments that each of her baby rabbits had been killed. Now, I know that rabbits or other animals do not have a mind. So not everything is entirely mental on extraperception level.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's one of the interesting things about the human mind-brain relationship is it's very hard sometimes to distinguish which is which. Man is really mind. That's what distinguishes us. The information that I work off of is that God actually does create powers of mind which he individualizes into an ego, and that ego, once created, lasts forever.
Sort of a bundle of particulate abilities,
right?
Not unlike a quantum particle.
But with characteristics far beyond anything that could be possible on a physical plane. It just doesn't seem possible to me that the brain, which is composed of matter, can somehow be so arranged in a way that matter can thereby perceive itself because some of itself was put into the brain structure.
It is a little hard to swallow that that's a chance arrangement and it's purely physical.
Right.
To get back to the mind, Richard, in The Ultimate Frontier you were talking about the powers of mind, and I think you had 10 qualities or so. I've got a note here somewhere on this. Could you elaborate and give me just a general thumbnail of the qualities of mind? It's obvious from people who survive auto accidents, one thing and another, that they are definitely there with all their radar running, as it were. That being out of the vehicle or it being incapacitated and not running, it takes nothing away from their reception.
Mm-hmm.
So I would be very interested in these 10 qualities if you could give us a little thumbnail on them.
Well, essentially the powers of mind are memory and desire, will, curiosity, consciousness, conscience, creativeness, intuition, reason, and emotion.
These sound like primary motivators, most of them.
Well, they're what get us moving to do something. Otherwise, we just sit like lumps waiting for something to come to feed us, like a clam. Even clams every so often decide to move on to another place. But it is true. These things are designed to push us into human experiences. And through experiences, of course, we learn. If we keep doing the same thing repeatedly for 60 years, we have not really furthered ourselves in any way. Are you interested in having a little breakdown on those kinds of things? Because I understand that those are words which we all heard, but I rather suspect that most people really wouldn't have a good idea how to put that in place.
If you've never seen anybody ride a bicycle, a description is as close as you can get.
All right, okay. Well, memory, of course, is very important to have a continuity of gaining knowledge from one lifetime to another. The brain, of course, is also capable of storing information, and conditioned reflexes are part of brain memory. But you also have to translate all your experiences into a continuation of knowledge that will not leave you. So when you're on another plane of existence outside of your physical body, you still have the benefit of everything that you've learned through your hard-gained knowledge.
No way to swim better than being thrown in the pool, I've heard it said.
Yeah, well, let's hope. And desire and will, they kind of operate together, since will involves the resolution of choices into an intention, a specific direction that you want to go. And desire provides the enthusiasm and determination to pursue that intention. Animals, on the other hand, only operate on conditioned reflex, instinct, and drives. And curiosity is a driving force which impels us to search and learn and advance even in the face of danger and discomfort, and that is not a characteristic of any animal. Consciousness provides an awareness of one's existence as an entity, distinct and separate from external things and beings. The ability to focus one's exclusive attention on specific and ordered thought processes is also a function of consciousness. And this is not an ability which any animal can experience. Animals are either awake or asleep. And awakeness in an animal is not the same as human consciousness by any means. Clairvoyance, incidentally, is a non-physical manifestation of consciousness.
No, hold it here. A non-physical manifestation of consciousness. Now, clairvoyance means to be able to see far. Is that...
See clear.
See clearly, that's it. Clairvoyance, see clear. Could you give me a couple of notes on clairvoyance?
Clairvoyance is the ability of a person who is physically alive to be able to perceive human activities on other planes of existence. For instance, the emotions of a person who you're having to deal with.
We're dealing with aura here then, right?
Yes, the human aura. You've heard of that, okay?
Yes, so you're saying that's a mental perception rather than with physical eyes.
Right, that's a mind-to-mind perception. But we're inclined to see things through our eyes while we're in physical incarnation, and so we tend always to see it.
Well, I can see little Johnny saying, "Mother, why is Mr. Jones glowing blue?" And she says, "Shut up and stop using your imagination." And that's the end of that.
Well, many children do have that ability, and they soon learn that it's not accepted, or people feel that they're being sassy or putting them on in some way, and so therefore they soon learn not to talk about it. Probably at least 4% of the population is more or less continuously clairvoyant.
What's the difference between clairvoyance and intuition?
Well,
I mean,
intuition is kind of a brain knowing to some extent. For instance, there's you all know what the logical process is. Step by step, you consciously move from one piece of known and use some other pieces of known until you come to yet another thing that you hadn't known about before, and that's some sort of deductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning also is a brain process of logic. And some things that we might call commonly horse sense. You just kind of know what the right answer is about doing something that's brand new and it works out. Really is kind of an intuition.
So if you think of life as a jigsaw puzzle, the shape of the next piece you need is determined by the pieces you've already placed. And you can see what you need by what you already have.
Right, and you can see that the next piece fits in. But there are some kinds of intuition which come to us in a purely mental way from the outside someplace, some outside source. We don't have any way of telling the difference if it was an internal logic or a pickup of something that came from the outside.
Now, this is an interesting point here, that many people don't realize that not every thought that originates, or that every thought that they hear more or less across their monitor inside their heads, many people are not aware of the fact that some of that can come from an outside source. You can be suggested to.
Oh, very definitely.
Now, this may sound like the ultimate paranoia, but I consider anything that makes me feel uncomfortable is probably being outside my own cognizance, that I'm picking up from somewhere else.
Thoughts that you're feeling uncomfortable with or
Yes.
seem a little perverse to your normal way of thinking.
Yes.
Yeah, that's very possible. Clairvoyance is usually a very conscious awareness of information which you're picking up from outside of yourself. Not necessarily just telepathy, but rather the seeing of the person on the other side who you're dealing with.
Oh,
Or
video too, huh?
Video too, right,
Oh.
also. The perception of the nature of the thoughts, not the thoughts themselves, but the nature of the thoughts of another individual through the awareness of the changes in the shadings of the colors in a person's aura. And so some things called intuition can directly be part of the brain. Some intuition is a reflection of things which you have picked up through some kind of inspiration, perhaps from some other mind. Not necessarily trying to direct you. Sometimes you just tap in automatically to other minds who are thinking the same thing at the same time, wherever they may be.
A similar interest.
A similar interest. So your minds are kind of en rapport, resonating with the same interest at that particular time.
Now here we come once again to one of these qualities of mind, which is reason.
Reason applies to thinking power and to the ability to consciously weigh facts and principles in order to arrive at a defendable conclusion through logical inference and deduction. And it's this quality of mind where we can determine cause and effect relationships, which are so very important to growing. Obviously, until such time as you're able to see the relationship between what you do and what happens to you, you're just going to be stumbling along through life.
What about emotions? Now, when you have something happen to you, the first thing you register the impression, and then invariably one of your emotions comes into play. You have the feeling in your body as the event occurs. How do emotions relate into all this? Are they part of mind?
Yes, definitely. A spirit intelligence has emotions just as you and I in physical.
Indeed. Raymond Moody's book, the people were experiencing varying emotions while they observed themselves being worked on the operating table or wherever they were.
Right.
And it was interesting to me. I'd always thought that the emotions were primarily a part of the bodily equipment. But these people were having the full range of emotions completely extravehicularly, as it were.
Mm-hmm. There's an important thing to remember, that there is a difference between emotions and feelings. Feelings are the muscular responses to emotions. Because for whatever, fear, for instance, immediately gets your muscles set up to, flee or fight or...
and the adrenaline, of course, is added right with it.
Right. Mm-hmm. And grief, for instance, causes the muscles of the cheeks and the diaphragm to get ready to do their job, to express that emotion. Whatever that emotion may be, there is a feeling which comes up in the physical body. So if you can remember that feelings really has a distinction between emotions, that we usually tend to combine them.
Well, I have a question on that, sort of on this subject. Where does now the word love, overused, I'm afraid, in our society, and to mean a variety of different things, where does that leave it? It's sort of an emotion, or is it? It's sort of a feeling too, but it also seems to exist without the physical vehicle.
Well, there are 5 basic emotions.
Okay.
And love is not one of them. I might just well mention what the basic ones are.
Okay.
They're awe, joy, grief, fear, and anger. And all the other emotions are modifications and combinations of these 5. And love is, incidentally, a power which is present in the universe.
And you called mind a power also, did you not?
Right.
Okay.
And love is a power which is on the same wavelength, except that love is the great creative and healing power that emanates from the mind of God. And when a person is reasonably mature, has a good sense of self-esteem and so forth, feels good enough about himself, it seems that opens the channels to allow love to flow through an individual, and he can then refocus it towards another person. But it still gives rise to muscular feelings which are very pleasant in the body. And so therefore it's kind of hard for people to distinguish that love is not an emotion which arises from outside of us. It is a power that we employ. It's the most beautiful thing, I think, about in the human experience. Jesus and St. John just went on and on about it as being so important to our proper human relationships.
Well, Richard, I guess for the last 25 minutes we've been basically assessing the fact that there is essentially a form of awareness beyond the physical, and that it is common for humans to have this kind of awareness, even though we are not really aware of it as such. Basically what religion's been saying for a long time. Would you agree with that?
Well, it seems that the branch of metaphysics that we call religion, as well as science, are both seeking to know what the truth is.
Mm-hmm.
They approach it from different directions. But when they arrive at the whole truth, they are going to find that it's the same truth for both. It just has to be.
So I guess we're still getting at the fact that arriving at truth, what we're seeing here is the mind and brain working together as the only real tool for attaining knowledge and experience, and I guess knowledge and experience become wisdom.
Yeah, there really is no other options for that, except maybe information coming from beyond, but that still has to be perceived by the mind.
And perceived properly, yes.
Right, and the mind and the brain mesh together so beautifully that we're mostly unable to sense a difference between the two, as we talked about before. But life takes on a whole new perspective when you look at this physical lifetime as an opportunity to gain experience and knowledge that you can use for the rest of time instead of merely having everything end at death. The human potential of every person can be glimpsed in the extraordinary mental skills that are publicized about, just a few unusual people.
Mm-hmm.
Any one of these exceptional individuals usually has, only one or a few of the wondrous skills which all of us are heir to. And every one of us should be musical geniuses. The power of lightning-quick calculations, evidenced by idiot savants, is inherent in all of us. I don't mean that we all can be idiots, but the mind readers and the people who can move material objects by willing it mentally have been proven genuine by scientists. Even children in some primitive tribes can walk unharmed on burning coals. And Albert Einstein can stretch his perceptions around the universe and point the way for others to do the same. All of us have the potential mental powers to accomplish everything that every so-called exceptional person has done.
And aside from the points you made about how it's bred out of you because you don't expect to be able to do it, how come more of the natural ability doesn't come through?
Well, I think it's always been dangerous for anyone to be different, and people conform by playing down and denying emerging powers that aren't popular. Society exacts a high price on a person who is genius. I think, therefore, we conform to mediocrity, and soon learn that high strivings bring censure and ostracism.
We seem to have run a good deal through our time limit here. I'd like to thank you for being here, Richard. The discussion has been most enlightening, and I think we've drawn some lines that will extend into some other discussions that we'll have on these topics.
Oh, I enjoyed it.
All right. You've been listening to In Pursuit of the Ultimate Frontier,